SDG-Hub, we'll be discussing the role of sustainable agriculture in promoting food security. And our guest, Worship Joshua Frimpong, Managing Director of Wiafe Agro and Trading Limited, and of course, Edward Kareweh, the General Secretary, the General Agricultural Workers Union. Business PM is kindly brought to you in partnership with the Center for Sustainable Transformation. Thank you very much for making time tonight on the SDG-Hub. It's a platform to discuss challenges and opportunities in every business, everyday business, to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs as we call them for short. These are 17 goals with targets and indicators agreed on by UN member states, including Ghana, to make the world a more just, equitable, greener and peaceful place by 2030. My name once again, Emmanuel Aboagye-Wiafe, and I'm here with Rosemary Balami. Rosemary, good evening. How are you?
Good evening. I'm good. What about you?
I'm also doing well. Fantastic. Rosemary Balami is from the Young Reporters for the Environment, YRE. That's the Center for Sustainable Transformation. Tonight on SDG-Hub, we'll discuss possible solutions to stabilizing food security in Ghana. Food is a basic necessity of life, but what happens when people are unable to meet this basic means of survival? Now, recently, the Asante Otumfuo State to the Second expressed worry over the near threat of food insecurity in the country, despite the abundance of fertile arable lands and enough intellectual capabilities in agriculture. Well, before we delve into the conversation, Rosemary has some facts on food insecurity. Rosemary?
Right, Emmanuel. According to the World Food Programme, 5.5 million people in Ghana are food insecure. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated food insecurity in Ghana, with many people losing their jobs and incomes and struggling to afford food. At the same time, food prices have been rising partly as a result of the ongoing global economic crisis. A survey conducted in 2020 by the Ghana Statistical Service and the World Bank found that already then 33% of households had reduced their food consumption due to the pandemic. According to the Global Hunger Index 2020, Ghana scored 24.7, indicating a serious level of hunger and food insecurity. In 2019, the prevalence of undernourishment in Ghana was at 12.4%, meaning that 3.4 million people in the country did not have access to sufficient food to meet their daily energy requirements. In the same year, the prevalence of stunting in children under the age of 5 was 19%, indicating a high level of malnutrition. Data from the 2022 Annual Household Income and Expenditure Survey revealed that 49.1% of the Ghanaian population was food insecure in the first quarter of the year. This represents 15.1 million of the 30.8 million persons in Ghana. This is serious.
Not only serious, but very worrying and alarming. But we have the experts here in the studio to help us better understand the issue of food insecurity and also possibly find solutions to this problem. Once again, Worship Joshua Frimpong, Managing Director for Wiafe Agro and Trading Limited, is here. Good evening, Worship.
Good evening.
All right, so we have the second guest. He's my friend. He's an old lot friend. Edward Kareweh is the General Secretary of the General Agricultural Workers Union. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome once again.
Good evening. Good evening.
So could you tell us a little about, we know you, I know you very well what you do, but for the sake of our listeners, what do you do in your field of work?
Well, we are a trade union, and a trade union that is operating within the agricultural sector. That is along the agricultural value chain. And then we operate in both formal and informal part of the economy.
Okay.
And when you come to the formal, we have a public formal where the state institutions like MOFA, CSIR, and its institutions, Cocoa Board, Irrigation Development Authority, and any public institution that has something to do with agriculture.
What about peasant farmers and other farmers that are spread across the country? Do you also engage them?
Yeah, that's why I'm saying that we are divided into two. We operate both in the formal and the informal. And then we have public formal, And that's the public formal I'm talking about. The public formal are the state agencies and institutions that have something to do with agriculture. And then the private formal is also there, where we have these multinational companies and big institutions that operate in the agriculture sector. For instance, if you talk about Ghana Oil Palm Development Company, which is at Kwai, you are talking about Benso Oil Palm Plantation, which is at Benso. You talk about GREL, that's Ghana Rubber Estate Limited. You talk about Volta River Estate, that's Volta. They produce banana for export and golden exotics and so on. They are huge international, multinational companies which operate in there. So they are private formal. Now you come to the informal. The informal, we decided to categorize them into two. Economic crop groupings. Now you talk about rice farmers. This is a distinct farmers group. You talk about cocoa farmers, a distinct farmers group. Tomato farmers, cashew farmers, and so on. Because they have different needs. So if you don't disaggregate them this way, you will not be able to address their needs.
That's a mouthful of
Then
rules.
beyond that, we now have the peasant farmers, who are the smallholder farmers, and they produce almost everything.
So you're an umbrella body for almost every farmer.
That's what we do.
Worship, what do you do?
So Wiafe Kenteng Agro and Trading Limited is an agricultural tech startup that's located in Asaase Agogo, and we're primarily focused on planting, irrigating, and selling maize, and with the vision of reducing hunger and supporting agriculture in the country to meet up with the growing population of the Ghanaian populace, and more importantly, to also add value to agriculture. And that's essentially what we've been in.
So you're within the agri-business value chain. Is that where you fall?
Exactly. And we this particular year we've been focused on starting some flagship initiatives like the legal aid project for Asaase Agro farmers. That is, helping these farmers understand their fundamental rights and understand their contractual obligations in terms of the contracts they have with other business partners. We believe that this is very basic and fundamental for them to know. It's part of the initiatives that we're doing in addition to adding value to agriculture and the people who do it. Yeah.
Very well. Thank you so much. Now, let's move into action. Now, Mr. Kareweh, when we say food insecurity, what do we mean?
Well, simply put, food security has to do with first availability of the food at all times in the year. So, and then we also talk about accessibility, that you can access the food. And then three, we also talk about quality of the food, So if you even pick these three indicators, availability, access, and then quality. So for instance, if you want meat, anytime you are cooking your food and you want meat to eat, then you can have the meat and you can have it in the quantity that is good. And that is the quality. Quality also has to do with, it's not just like you go and buy kenke, you cannot afford fish and you only put pepper alone and you eat and fill your stomach. And you think that you have eaten food. So again, that is not food security. You see. And then accessibility is you must be able to buy it. In fact, sometimes we confuse food availability with food accessibility. You move around, you see food stalls all over. You see rice in the shops and so on. You say, oh, Ghana has got food. But many people cannot access it in the quantity, quality, and the time that they need it.
So when one of these indicators is missing, can we still refer to it as food insecurity because we don't have the full chain?
Yeah, certainly one of these indicators is missing. Then, of course, you haven't yet achieved food security in the country.
Okay. Now, Joshua, can you describe the current state of food insecurity in the country? What do the numbers we have just heard from Rosemary mean in practice for Ghanaians? And what can account for the current situation of food insecurity we find ourselves in?
Well, essentially, just like Rosemary mentioned, we are currently in we're gradually entering into a very bad state for our food security. And that is because we have not properly invested, into agricultural sector. We're not done proper innovative investment, looking at the appropriate sectors and the centers that really require investment for us to do it. We'd rather spread the investments across just because we want farmers to have a feel of it. But when you really want to meet all the indicators of food security, it means that you need to primarily focus on the actual centers that are going to lead you to do this. The people who are in charge of making the foods, you're checking the practices that they are doing to ensure that the foods that are being produced are quality. You're also ensuring that the people who are bringing it into the market, like you mentioned, the foods can be available, but they may not be accessible. They may not be affordable. And so if the cost of, producing the food is unbearable, it means that the outcome is that the people who are coming to sell it will also have to add up. And then the burden comes on the consumers. And so we're gradually getting to the point where even though there may be some availability of the food, but people are finding it very difficult to access it. And when people do not buy, it means that they also don't get the money back to, get into the production phase again, to reproduce again. Once there's burden on production, it means that we're going to have shortages. So all of them are, interconnected, interrelated, and once there's a section that has a problem, the other section, gets affected. And Ghana's recent population has increased.
Yes.
Over
30 million.
Yes, and with an increase in that, we expect that it's a call that we direct our attention to agricultural sector and make it more lucrative, make it more exciting that people would want to enter inside. And if people have to suffer and people have to go for loans and all of that, we'll be able to produce the foods that we're doing. Nobody really find it lucrative.
And so, which of the categories of population in Ghana would you say are most vulnerable to food insecurity, and how does it vary from demographic groups and regions?
Well, so I use my area of planting as an example. Within the native areas, foods are available for them. In fact, even accessibility is quite easier because they grow it there. The prices are not high as compared to when you come to the urban areas.
Yeah.
And so the people in the urban areas are the ones who are most closer to getting, threatened by food, insecurity. They are the ones who wouldn't be able to afford the food that, they're supposed to buy.
Right.
So those within, the native areas, the rural areas, they have the food available for the but okay. I mean, when I went to Agogo like this, you find the foods are available. You can buy, the fufu you buy for here at 50 cities that you get something mega. You go there and then you can just get 10 cities, 20 cities, and then you're okay. So the problem is not high. It's not accelerated there. But if you come really to the urban areas, particularly Accra, because of how the population has increased, everybody really wants to come to Accra to do something. There's a lot of pressure here. And if you're conversing on social media like I am, you see a lot more people, particularly the youth, talk about, hey, I just want to buy something here, kinky. This kinky balls, this is how much it costs now. All of that.
So would you say it's because of the fact that these people are unable to access it, unlike those in the rural areas?
Well, I would say for a fact that the cost of production is higher. When they transport it here to the urban areas, the consumer becomes burdened in the process.
Okay.
That's really the point. The processes to get whatever to bring it here is a problem. And so it really becomes, for example, when I finished my maize and it was ready for Accra, they were charging me 30 cedis per bag.
Okay, just to transport it to
Yes.
Accra.
So I'm assuming I'm supposed to bring 200 bags to Accra. That's a whooping sum of money,
Yeah,
So,
right. The effects of transportation.
yeah, and all of that. Yeah.
So, less priority is given to food insecurity in public discussions, but we believe these have some, consequences. So what are some of these impacts of food insecurity on the health and well-being of Ghanaians, Mr. Edward?
Well, we are all clear that food is so fundamental to our survival.
Yeah.
Even if you lack anything at all, not food. Unfortunately, we are lacking food too. So food insecurity will impact seriously on the population. Once you cannot get food to eat, there's no way out. You can have enough energy you can't have a strong population, labor force to work. Food is also medicine, and the type of food we eat also attract some type of ailments. Food is both medicine and poison. Yeah.
Tell us more.
Yeah, in the sense that when you are hungry and you eat food, you just wake up and you get strong. And then when you take some particular food, you are able to heal certain
Faster.
ailments. No, you just heal them.
Okay.
Yeah, you just heal them. And because of also food, you are prone to certain diseases. So we are what we eat. We are what we eat. So when we begin to eat less, then we become, with poor nutrition and so on, then you begin to attract some diseases that if you were to eat well, it will not come. If you look at diabetes and the rest, they are all linked to our lifestyles, food that we eat, and so on. Obesity and all manner of things, hypertension and the rest. It's all about the meals that we eat.
Right.
So when there's food insecurity, that is the health part of it. But the social part is so huge. People will be tempted to divert resources from other areas of their life in order to buy food, because food is basic. So other aspects of human life will suffer. Education will suffer, and then other expenses will suffer. Schooling will suffer of children and so on. So all those things. And then apart from that, it can now lead to social unrest. It can promote, crime. Crime, stealing. People can now fight over, hunger, as we always see that a hungry man is an angry man. So if we become so hungry, you can know that we certainly become angry. So in some of the wars, the tribal wars, the community wars, fights that come, it's all about food, because access to resources that can give food and so on. So once you become hungry, you can trust that all these social vices will go up. No, once we are insecure, they will increase.
Indeed. So now, Joshua, tell us, how does food insecurity intersect with other social, economic, and political issues in Ghana?
That's an amazing question. Yeah. When we particularly talk about food insecurity, just like he's talked about, once people are not able to access the food, then a lot more people direct their frustrations to the people in government, thinking that the people in government are not supporting and are not making livelihoods quite easier for them, right? And particularly, I'll start from the people who are planting. From part of our engagement with them and some of our documentaries, we realize that these people consistently complain that they are not getting the support, particularly on mechanization, to help them, produce these foods faster. And this frustration, has gotten a lot of them, particularly the youth who entered inside, to move away. The more we have a lot more people moving away from agricultural sector, the greater the problem is, because we have less people who are going to be doing the planting for us to enjoy. Why? Because there's pressure in the production phase. These people move away, and then we have food shortages. It increases the food insecurity. We come to the people who are the beneficiaries of the products of what these farmers would do, and then there's little food on the market. What happens is that because there's scarcity, prices increases. The little that is there, everybody wants to make profit out of it and all of that, and people get worried. Recently, when we had inflation, you saw how things really became an issue in the country. Basic things like even plantain chips, people had increased the prices to 5 cedis, something very little. Everybody's like, really, plantain chips that we all used to get it like 2 cedis, 1 cedis, why? And then you hear them say, it's because plantain is not, it's not available, So it really affects every aspect of our lives. And if you're a government in power, it becomes a problem for you, because you become less of a favorite to the people. The people actually think that you are not doing much to help them. But these issues may go beyond, that particular government in power. They may go, to the roots of it, to some of the practices that we are adopting for agricultural, sectors and all of that. So, these are some of the threats that we can consider.
I personally am impressed with what successive governments have done, with food production and their efforts to actually feed the nation. And you realize that it never gets fulfilled, because beyond at every point in time, there's still this shortage. Now, but does climate change and environmental factors affect food security in Ghana?
Well, first you also have to look at the food production structure or the agricultural sector structure in Ghana. It is largely rain-fed agriculture.
Okay.
That is, we depend on the rain.
Yeah.
You know, in fact, irrigation is just, agriculture is just minimal. So when there's climate change, and which we are all seeing, fortunately, climate change phenomenon is what we feel. The rains don't come the time that we used to know or want them to come. And when they come, sometimes they come in quantities that is too much, and then we get unnecessary floods. Sometimes less quantities, and then our crops wither. So certainly climate change is affecting agriculture, and we ought to know this. We ought to know, and we do know, that climate change is there with us, and it is coming, and it will be severe in years to come.
And so, what are some of the effects to help confront this issue, especially on agric?
Well, sometimes I think that we are just not ready to confront the issues. We are not yet ready to produce enough to become food secure in this country because of the things we do and we don't do. You know, for instance, if you are a farmer or a young farmer and you see that you have to go into production, look at the effect of the, let me say, on the lands. It tells you that in future there will not be land for us to expand.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, we all just see it.
Yeah.
It is not a type of business that allows agriculture to go on. It simply destroys agriculture, not for today alone, but for years to come, because we don't have the capacity to reclaim, and that capacity is not with the individuals. No individual has got the capacity to reclaim the land, and the state too doesn't have the capacity because it requires so much capital to be invested in the reclaiming of that land, and our state doesn't have it. It doesn't have it today, and we don't think that in the near future they will have so much. So you see, we have our actions and inactions. It's destroying agriculture forever. In fact, this one doesn't even have anything to do with what climate change.
Okay.
But then, if it comes to climate change, we know the rains are. How are we harvesting water for the future? We've made efforts here and there. There are already existing dams. Government has also tried to build the One Village, One Dam. But unfortunately, the One Village, One Dam project is not viable. It doesn't exist. You know?
Okay.
So on the issue of the One Village, One Dam,
Yes.
you know that, Mr. Edward, we know that GAWU, that is the General Agricultural Workers Union, represents and safeguards the interests of agricultural workers in Ghana.
Yes.
And are there any projects or programs that you have carried out for the betterment of farmers and, in addressing food insecurity?
Well, we are an advocacy group. So what we do is to get the various state institutions. That's why when I was giving the structure of our union, you could see that we deal with state institutions as well. They formulate the policies, and then we also check the policies, try to influence those policies so that it could be of benefit to the farmers. The private sector, which is also huge, what is their role in promoting agriculture or in driving out, farmers not to be able to have enough food for themselves? We are concerned about them. So you can see that our role is not necessarily direct. And then again, you can see that the research institutions, what type of work do they do? And when they get their research material, who promotes it? If you're a researcher, you are not a marketer. If you're a researcher, you don't become an investor. You see, if you're a researcher, you don't become a policymaker. So you can research, come out with findings, but those, it will not be promoted. And we all know how state policy is huge in influencing our economy and our lives. And because of state policy that we are sitting here, those years where you could not set up a radio station,
they're over.
We were not here. Today, through policy, you can set up radio station anywhere. That allows us to be sitting here today. So state policy is critical. And that's why we think that the state must lead us, both the private and everybody, to the direction that state wants us to. And the state has interest in doing it because it is the state responsibility, to ensure that there's no poverty, to ensure that there's employment, to ensure that there's no hunger.
Okay, so
Right.
knowing that
Interesting.
GAU works with state institutions, for
Yes.
instance, the current administration had a high profile on food and agriculture.
Yes.
So are there any policies that exist to help farmers in Ghana in the current situation of food insecurity?
Well, there are policies,
Right.
of course, and there have always been policies, except that the policies have to be implemented to the letter, and they must be effective. For instance, the major policy that we know, planting for food and jobs, which encompasses different sectors of the economy, we have to assess and see what are the outcomes of it. We have invested so much fertilizer, and just recently, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, we've heard that some fertilizer owners are not yet paid. They've taken fertilizer from them for the plan for food and jobs, and they've not yet been paid. So how could they supply further fertilizer? So state needs to pay that. You get it?
Okay.
So it's not only about the quality of the policy, it's about the implementation of the policy. And when the implementation is not well done, it creates a lot of waste. In fact, it sometimes creates loss for the individual farmers.
Okay.
For instance,
Well-
the linkage between market and production is
Right.
very key, because agricultural produce is what? Highly perishable and then bulky. So once you produce, you must have ready market. And where that market is not there, the farmer or the producer runs into serious losses.
It's interesting. We can never conclude or exhaust agricultural topics, but we don't have much time tonight. It's almost time. And finally, with you, Worship, how can individuals and communities in Ghana work together to address food insecurity to help improve access to food?
Well, so particularly for, I would start with the government. It's often important that we start with them. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a long-term stewardship, between human and then natural resources, and they're both of equal importance towards, us achieving our short-term economic gains and long-term economic gains. And it's important that as we invest, to protect our natural resources, we also pay much attention to the livelihoods of the people who, are in charge of making this production. Once we invest in the farmers, then, it directly translates into the high production of, the produce that we have for people to consume. And also for the private sector, I think there's a lot more that we can tap from them. They've been quite dormant on the scene, but I would ask that, they support. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your expertise and insights on this conversation. Make sure you tune in same time next week as we continue discussions on all things sustainable development right here on Asaase 99.5 so that people and planets can prosper. If you have a topic you would like us to discuss, send us an email at info@cestint.org.
Thank you so much once again for your time on SDG-Hub. We've been speaking with Worship Joshua Frimpong from Wiafe Agro and Trading Limited and Edward Kareweh from GAU, or the General Agricultural Workers Union. My name is Emmanuel Aboagye-Wiafe, and I did this with my co-host,
Rosemary Balami.
Thank you very much.